This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by When the Sky Comes Looking for You. Short Trips Down the Thunder Road by Chadwick Ginther. Available October 19th at McNally Robinson Booksellers and soon bookstores everywhere.
Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. I am here with my long-suffering co-host, Justin Curry, known the world over as Chasing Artwork, our producer, Dan Vadeboncoeur, who used his extraordinary powers to solve a major technical issue this morning, and returning from the wilds of Winnipeg, Chadwick Ginther, author of the new short story collection, When the Sky Comes Looking for You. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back, guys.
You're welcome. Short stories. Let's give everyone a little backstory about Chadwick. Longtime listeners of the show will have heard us drop this name more than once. He is a prolific author, and I would love it if you could give people a taste of what it is you like to write and why it is you write, and you can name drop your books unabashedly.
All right. I typically write fantasy, but more specifically, I like the term mythic fiction, which I believe was coined by either Charles Lent or Terry Wendling, and that's stories where mythology and folklore intersect with the narrative, and so myth and folklore is kind of one of the early loves I had as a reader. And so that kind of, I think, has long-term influenced what I like to read, what I like to write. It's all intersected in a messy tangle with a superhero vibe.
I was wondering if you were going to drop your superhero influences.
Oh, right, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Comics are why I learned to read. As a young boy, I had an early hospital stay. My mom bought a bunch of comics, and I could visually follow the narrative faster than she could read the words aloud to me.
It's also the origin story of the villain
in Unbreakable.
Mr. Glass.
Yeah. But it was like, if he turned out all right, you would get Chadwick Ginther.
But I got, I got frustrated because I could see the story unfolding, and I wanted to just be able to read it for myself. And that, I think, was one of the things that pushed me to read. My parents were great about buying me books as a kid, and I definitely sunk into every family gathering. It's like they literally have to drag the book out of my hand so I could eat dinner, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
so from reluctant reader to voracious reader to writer, what's that like? Were you a reluctant writer also? Is there a reluctancy in there, or did you just dive right in?
I always loved story. I had the new collection, When the Sky Comes Looking for You. It's dedicated to my great-great-uncle and my great-great-great-uncle, who were fortunately still alive for me to know into their 80s. And in the case of my great-great-uncle, he was 107 when he passed. And so they had stories about growing up on the prairie. And my great-great-uncle, he was a huge Lone Ranger fan, Tarzan fan, so he just told me those stories. From what he had seen, in early films or radio plays.
Early serials or early pulps, and so you would just recount them.
Filtered through, his memory. And then, I guess I was a handful, and I was like, I want another story. And he finally was like, I'm out of stories. You tell me a story. And then I had to take what he had told me, because I didn't have firsthand experience with Tarzan or the Lone Ranger, besides maybe some of those story records. Mm-hmm. I think I had a Lone Ranger story record. And so I then had to make up something for him, and that kind of got the story side of writing happening. That was definitely the genesis. That's my origin story right there.
Yeah, the armchair psychologist in me sees that you're introduced to the notion of archetype early. I'm sure that the oral storytelling versions of the Lone Ranger stories were very different than they were as he internalized them. But once you have the archetype, you can just add whatever elements you want, right? Absolutely. And isn't that what mythology is? Lone Ranger is just a mythic character.
Yeah, and so like reading comics got me into. I always loved the fantasy and science fiction side, but fantasy is probably definitely my first love of those. So I kept reading, kept expanding that way. I didn't give a lot of thought to being a writer. That just seemed like a thing that wasn't a possibility.
It's not a real job.
No, like I mean, I didn't know any. You know, I grew up in small town Manitoba. I didn't know anyone who had been a writer. It didn't seem possible until I moved back to Winnipeg, got a job at a bookstore, saw people launching their books day in and day out, many of them from Manitoba, had daily interactions.
That's how we first met, I believe, yeah.
I like had daily interactions with writers, and it's like, no, this is a thing that can be pursued. And most of my storytelling outlet prior to that was through role-playing games. You know, D&D was my first real creating original characters.
But you and your uncles had practiced.
We had practiced that, yeah. And and then when I started running my own games, that was my first trying to come up with a narrative, trying to direct a story, trying to world build. And usually I was world building within an established world, which is familiar to anybody who would have worked in Marvel Comics or DC. Like there's only so much you can do. It's like the Forgotten Realms or the Forgotten Realms if you're playing there. Greyhawk is Greyhawk.
So you've been a capital S storyteller for longer than you've been a capital W writer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I can't remember what finally. I think it was there was a Wizards of the Coast had a Dungeons and Dragons novel contest. And I didn't win it because I had a lot of stuff. Well, I had a lot of stuff going on at that time in my life, but I still wrote up my proposal, and I still hit send. Yeah. And it was. I don't think it was a great proposal. It worked with met all the guidelines.
You're right.
I never would have finished that book in the timeline that they needed because I'd never finished a book. Right, like I had it in my head. I'm like, well, I can write, and I've finished a short story. It's just this will just take that much longer, right?
So this was a proposal for a full.
Yeah, it was an outline for a full fantasy novel. Yeah. Here are my characters. Here are the monsters. Here are the situations. That was kind of how they wanted it.
Was this to TSR when they had that?
It would have been Wizards of the Coast by that point, because I think it was specifically. It was in their. Their gods and priests line, where they had each of the book was about a specific,
element of their pantheon.
The pantheon.
Yeah. I find
that sort of made me like, okay, I want to do this.
So you made the complete plan, an outline. Did they demand an outline? Now.
And I don't write like that at all.
I was going to say, in the interest of full disclosure, I happen to know that that's sort of the antithesis of how you are now as a writer. Do you think that effort of making that cogent plan and sending it off changed your writing process after? Or how did you know then that it was right for you or wrong for you? Or you were just thrilled to have done it?
No idea. That was what they were demanding. And I'm like, well, if I don't give them an outline of if I don't tell them all the monsters I'm going to use and who the characters are and what the situations are, if I don't tell them what the plot is, how can they say yes, right? Like I'm fundamentally not doing the thing they've asked me to do, so they're never going to.
Right.
It's sort of like when they had a campaign setting contest, and one of the rules was everything present in the Dungeons and Dragons core rule books has to be present in your setting.
Right.
So if you're like, I hate gnomes, there's not going to be any gnomes in my setting.
Right.
They're just like as soon as you say that, they're binning your. It doesn't matter how good your.
Hold on, I have to clear the air right now. Do you hate gnomes?
I don't.
I sure hope this plan of yours works.
I'm kind of hoping that myself.
So you said you don't use outlines. Does that mean you pants everything?
I think everybody's kind of on a spectrum between I outline everything and I don't plan anything.
Yeah.
Like,
and for our dear listener, maybe we should describe the two, right? Because we talk about them often.
Yeah, we've mentioned it, but every episode is somebody's first episode. So pantsing is literally writing by the seat of your pants. You're going to meet the character and go on an adventure with them, one paragraph at a time, and then the quote-unquote plotting or shaping happens in the rewrite, not in that first.
Right, and that's absolutely how my first published novel, Thunder Road, started. Mm-hmm. I had an idea about a blue-collared guy getting thrust into a world full of magic. I knew I wanted that world to be our world, because the previous novel I had finished, which is still unpublished, was a secondary world fantasy. It was a sword and sorcery novel. So I just wanted to do something different. So I'm like, magic is our world. I was reading a lot of urban fantasy. So like Jim Butcher, Patricia Briggs, Carrie Vaughan, Tanya Huff, like so many great authors in that subgenre. So that was what I wanted to do, and that was all I had when I started. Blue collared guy, thrust into a world full of magic, and I don't know if I just recently had my first tattoo, but that was kind of in the back of my mind, and so it was like that was going to be the
main character has those magical tattoos,
and like I'd always been a Norse mythology reader, so I'm like, that's probably going to go in there, and like I just started kind of connecting the dots mentally before I sat down to write. Like we have Gimli, which has got a huge Icelandic community, and like Balder is a Norse god, and there's a town named Balder in Manitoba. There's a rural municipality of Bifrost, like all that stuff. Yeah. Like it was just right there. And I wrote the tattooing scene where it's almost a body horror scene to do. Like I had a couple of readers who were like, I got to that point and I stopped reading because I don't read horror. And I'm like, it's not a horror novel. Right. But that scene was kind of written as body horror, and it wasn't a fun way to get tattooed, and it wasn't a fun way to get superpowers.
Right.
But I wrote that scene, and I'm like, who is this guy? Why is this happening to him?
So the scene came before the character.
The scene came before the character. He was just a guy.
And so as he suffered, did the character come out?
Yeah, like, and how he tried to resist, and how I'm like, he's a big man. He's used to being in power. Now he's powerless. I like that juxtaposition of somebody who had always had power, having it taken away from them.
Right.
And him being so far out of his depth, like he had no idea what was going to happen to him. Like, is he going to get murdered? Is he going to get raped? Is he going to, what is happening to me? I'm being strangled, stripped. Anything could happen. Any of my nightmares could happen. And, I'm like, but who is this guy? And like, why did he try? Why was his first instinct to fight?
So so as you're writing that, as the words are coming out, as the paragraphs are stacking, I'd be curious to know in the minutia. I want to get down to the fine grains. Is this happening in one writing sprint?
That scene did, absolutely. And then I had to figure out who he was,
how to get there.
Yeah, and so I had that, after? and I'm like, well, he's getting tattooed with his powers. What does that look like? So then the next scene I wrote was going to be the prologue. I was going to start with him with his power, and so it was a fight with him, between him and a giant, to just show like
what he can do.
Yeah, and it sort of kind of grounded it for me too. I'm like, well, I need to know what his powers are. I need to know what he can do, and what is happening. And what are the rules?
What's the rules?
And
that scene you wrote after.
I wrote that after,
but it comes first.
No, it was meant to come first.
Okay.
And then I didn't like it as the prologue, because I'm like, it to me, it took away from some of the scene and the terror if we know he gets superpowers right away. I mean, you can read the back cover copy and okay. Right, like, and it's like, oh, this guy's gonna get powers. That's probably how. But
I get this question a lot of people who are. I just did a workshop at McNally, and I'm doing 5 days in Steinbeck, and I know this question will come up if you're pantsing, so I'm going to borrow your good answer, I think. And you believe that this scene is going to come first, and then you said, then I decided I didn't like it there. Yeah. At what point in your draft process are you giving yourself the freedom to make huge substantive changes like that? Like, no, that'll come later.
I try to finish a draft before I start moving things around.
So the whole draft.
But that I knew almost right away that I didn't want it. The very earliest document of that, it says prologue. And I'm like, I don't want that there. The fight became a scene. I'm like, it's going later in the book, and I just kind of kept writing towards it. So I knew I was coming towards that scene. So instead, I wrote what got him on the road, why he wasn't still in Alberta, why he ended up divorced, why he met a fortune teller on the side of the road, like all of those things kind of. And it's funny, like I had a friend who worked oil shutdowns in Alberta, and if he hadn't told me some of his stories, would Ted have ever been an Albertan? Would he have ever worked the oil rigs? Like maybe he would have been a mechanic. Maybe he would there would have been the blue collar. I think still would have been there, but the conflagration of an oil site exploding and a fire giant bursting out of it that became the prologue, like that came from a story of my friend saying, yeah, I got to a work site right when there was a big fire, and he said a line that made it into the book, and he's like, it's like if you're close enough to get knocked down, you're never getting up again. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, first of all, how can you work there? Yeah. It just sounds terrible. But it really struck a vibe. And it ended up being what sold the book. That prologue sold the book. They read the reaction to this main character, seeing the magical intrude on his life. And like, here's where influences start showing up. I think David Annandale has been on the program before.
We've never had David. David, if you're listening,
but we've
mentioned him many times.
He's a huge Godzilla fan, and I'm a huge Godzilla fan. And that was essentially, it was written as a kaiju moment. It was written as a sublime terror, right? Like this is so far, like seeing a 300, 400 foot tall giant, is so far out of anything we could understand or process, right? And
the mythic.
Like, it's the mythic. And like there can be evidence of it and people still won't believe it. Right. It's like, it's got to be CGI. Or like, why would it be CGI? Like, why would I lie about this? Right? I would come up with a more plausible lie for why I don't want to work there anymore.
Okay, so I'm seeing this like synthesis of like growing up with visual storytelling first, and then narrative, and then oral storytelling, and then role-playing games, and like crafting story along plots, and then you're sitting down to write a novel. You wrote a complete sort of secret novel. We leaked it recently. You mentioned that you did it. You put it in a drawer.
I maybe starting with a 6 point of view, multi-arc, interweaving first book in a trilogy or ongoing series wasn't the best way to learn the craft.
But that's where everybody starts. Why don't we all do that?
I was reading a ton of Scott Lynch, a ton of George Martin. Yeah. I grew up, like, there wasn't a lot of urban fantasy when I was reading fantasy as a kid. It was David Eddings. It was Lord of the Rings. It was Terry Brooks. Like, Robin Hobb. Like, those were the series that I was reading. It was all... And so that just sort of seemed like my natural starting point. I've always loved Conan. I've always loved sword and sorcery. So I tried doing that. But I think the epic fantasy that I read sort of intruded on that, and so I wanted to show more of the world, and so I wanted to, come at it from all these different characters.
Dr. Nico Topodopoulos? It's Topoulos. Whatever.
We both have pieces of writing in a short story collection called Shared World, but when I'm writing fantasy as a setting, I find the hardest part is making it interesting in contrast to a world that's already interesting. And so do you find that by setting it in the real world, that mythic element is easier for your casual reader to connect with? They have less to step over?
I think maybe that's true, yeah. Like it's sort of the, you can have one weird thing rule, right? Yeah. Like, and it's not, it's not as much of a rule in fantasy, but you can in a lot of films you can give your audience one big ask, and then if that ask is that ghosts are real, they will follow you along for the story. But then if you're like, oh no, it was a vampire all along, and you haven't introduced vampires at all, right? Like it will totally throw them out. And I feel like
although I think we're about to story break a haunted house story where everyone thinks it's ghosts, but it's a vampire the whole time. No, we're not.
No, we're not doing this.
Dan says no, we're not allowed. We have to stick to our
plan. Stick to the plan.
So one thing that I have admired, I mentioned this to you in our correspondence, Chadwick. I have always admired your capacity to write, finish, polish, redraft complete short stories, find markets for them, find publications for them, regular. So I want to talk about that, and I think that leads nicely into your short story
Just before that, though, like, at what point did writing become something serious? Was it at that Wizard of the Coast? Like that? Was that when it was clicked that...
That was the impetus, but then I realized that one of my coworkers was a secret novelist.
Oh.
And it wasn't a secret.
Was it smut?
No, it was. he wrote literary fiction. He had been published by Turnstone Press as well, my publisher. But I just wasn't really aware of it. And then it just kind of clicked. I looked at him, and I looked up at the wall on the office at McNally, and I'm like, Steve, you wrote a book? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm working on a new one right now. And he was one of my early mentors. Right. He's like, well, if you want to write something, you got to write it.
Yeah.
And if you want it to be on the shelf, you have to finish it.
Yeah.
And so he just, when I'm like, I want to write a book, and he's like, how many pages did you write today?
Yeah.
And so it took a long time to build the routine. I started very small. I worked Thursday evenings, and so I'm like, Thursday morning is my writing day. I'll write Thursday morning before work. Right. Because I have that time. That is my time. There's no intrusions on it.
Purposely because of the Norse mythology connection?
No. That was my late night at work at that particular time. And so I'm like, okay, I have no distractions.
Oh, because you're at work.
Well, I would work in the evenings. I would work in the evening, so I didn't start work until 2 or 2:30. And so I had almost a full day of work that I could devote to it. And it started very small. And he's like, today was your writing day. How much did you write? I'm like, only like 100 words. Yeah. He's like, 100 more words than you had last week.
So true. Right? Yeah. And one word is progress.
And the more I wrote, the more I wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then it became, I don't want to wait for Thursday. I'm going to get up early and I'm going to write on my weekends. And I kept writing more and more. And then I got through that, finished my first real short story as an adult that was intended for publication. Sent it off originally to a contest, and then got some good feedback on it, and then started trying to sell it. And it didn't sell, but it was the impetus for the world that became my first unpublished novel.
Right.
So that story meant a lot because it told me I could start and finish a story. I created a world for it because I had to, because it was a fantasy novel, and then
and it had to be real enough in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then I expanded that world into a novel, and then I just kind of kept going. For me, short stories, like, I absolutely believe they are their own art form. They are their own, I never considered myself a natural short story writer. I didn't really read them until I started trying to write them.
Oh, interesting.
I read novels. That was what I read. But I started reading them as research. And they became, even if I don't sell this, I've built out the setting for my book. Or I've tried out this character. I kind of like this character. I want to come back to this character. So it was like they were tryouts for me. And that sounds horrible for the people who have made a career as short story writers, who are like gifted short story writers.
No, but that was not horrible because it's how you're figuring out how to pick up the weights and carry them, right?
Yeah.
And that's so many people come to us and say like, oh, I want to do a graphic novel. How do I start? I have I have a 300-page, epic.
And that's a prologue. Yeah. And then the first of the 7 books is like,
and I've heard this episode, you're not going to finish it.
Yeah. Write a 5-page. Have it feature characters you want to use again. Have it feature settings you want to use again. But get in and out in 2-page turns.
Yeah.
Show us that you can write comics that way. And you can find any artist around you to illustrate that, because you're not asking them for months of their time. You're asking them for a week or 2 of their time. And they'll probably have a fun time doing it with you.
Yeah. And so it started as that, I'm like, well, I'm writing things that I could use later, or that will help me tell the other story that I'm trying to tell, which is in a novel format. And then it became, well, it sure would be nice to have some fiction credits to my name when I'm trying to sell this novel that I have almost finished.
Right.
So it's like, if I'm pitching it to agents and pitching it to editors, if I have never published anything, maybe they'll take me seriously. Right. I don't know. But if it's like, I've sold stories to this market and this market, and
and it shows. I think that's a really important step in anything. If you're, whether you're doing comics or prose writing or some version of the two, having a list of rejections is really important. Because you can mention that even as you are submitting, or if you get to that point where you're talking to the editor, you can go, I did submit it to this place and this place. They said no because this, and these are the changes I made. Those are really useful. Yeah. People think rejections you shouldn't bring up. If your rejection was based on something that you didn't achieve and now you've changed, by all means bring that up. And then even if you just get a single short story in the door, the very first short thing I had published was in a little anthology collection out of the UK, and they published the wrong low-res files. And so I can never show it to anyone proudly, but I am so proud that once it happened, and when someone said, you make comics, have you ever been published? And the first time I was able to say yes, emboldened me in such a significant way.
Within a European publisher.
Yeah, Where? Just this little publisher
you wouldn't know
in the UK. You wouldn't know them, right? And nor could you find copies because they didn't make that many. But just that step of I went through the full life cycle of publishing. Short stories teach you that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea, I don't write with track changes. I know a lot of writers do. Track changes doesn't come into play for me until I am actually an editorial with a publisher.
Yeah, me either.
I don't like it. It muddles things to me.
Yeah, to track the changes of my own manuscript.
And I edit so much on longhand.
Hold on, I'm reeling still. Do you know people who keep track changes on their own current manuscripts all the time?
You guys, when you say track changes, does that mean
in Microsoft Word? So if I'm writing something. And then, I don't like that. And then you go back and you delete that sentence. It shows the deleted sentence.
Oh God, no! That'd be such a mess.
And I feel like they don't necessarily turn it on when they're drafting,
right?
But they use it through their entire process.
No way.
I don't like. I have a dump folder. From if I'm taking out scenes, and even if it's I really like this sentence, it doesn't work here. I just ditch it in another document.
See, I throw it into the bottom of the document.
Me too.
So I just say, I'm not using this. Put it down here.
That's a lot of fish.
I've got a random snippets
slush
document
pile of nice ideas.
And if I see an open call for an anthology that I'm interested in, I go through that. It's a novel of its own now. It's it's over 200 pages of just all the things, all these bits, and I'm like, this has a werewolf theme. This is I'm just going to pull all these bits, and I start looking at that.
Don't eliminate transmute.
And then I'm like, okay, what is the story in these? And I don't use half of them.
Yeah.
But it's not an efficient way to write a short story. The efficient way to write a short story is to just write it, I think. But
who does that?
But you know what? But for me, a lot of the times that was what I needed to do to write to theme.
Yeah.
Or I get a burst of inspiration on the bus and I write a fevered 1,000 words, but I don't know what happens next.
Right.
It's just a scene. And so when I have some of those scenes, I'll often this scene fits this open call anthology. I'm going to build a story now around this scene. I'm going to finish this story that started as the scene. What else do I have that can tie into this?
I often think of it as a big puzzle, and sometimes you'll suddenly figure out that entire corner of the puzzle, and you'll be
click.
When I'm short story writing, I'm more of a quilter than a pantser, and it's I take all these bits and I stitch them together, and then it's hey, we have a thing.
Well, you mentioned this idea of this efficiency in writing a story. I don't think individual efficiencies are transposable. How I write efficiently, if I said, now do it this way, Chadwick, you would say, what the F? I was...
Well, the only reason I say it's inefficient is that my last Midnight Man story that was published in prose had 18 drafts.
18?
And that's what it took for me to get from those quilt of bits to... And some of it was thematically changed, it was originally going to be more of a horror story. It was originally going to be set in the Thunder Road universe. It was going to be an offspring of Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, was going to be the monster. And that whole story is actually Nico's fault. Nico Rudolph, because he took pictures of the MS Lord Selkirk, abandoned in some slough somewhere where it had been towed to rot. I'm like, that's a great place for a horror story. Actually, I thanked him in the credits of the anthology. I'm like, if Nico hadn't taken those pictures, the story wouldn't exist, because that made me write the inciting scene. And then it wasn't working, and I'm like, you know what would really make me happy right now is if all these people who are going to die had a pulp hero show up. And he can't save all of them, but maybe he can save one of them.
He's going to do his best.
He's going to do his best to save one of them.
The Lone Ranger showed up.
Kind of, yeah.
Right?
I mean, my Lone Ranger showed up.
This is why I really wish in like prose novels at the back they'd have kind of like in a lot of comics they'll have like the making of section. I want like the napkin sketch of like this idea came from my friend Nico's pictures.
You will love when this guy comes looking for you, because in addition to an introduction which has a 10-year overview, because it's the 10th anniversary of Thunder Road's publication.
Oh wow! Congratulations!
In addition to the introduction being a 10-year overview of how the series ended up. I have a behind the scenes on each individual story,
That's
what
awesome.
it was like to write them, and where the inspiration came from, and when you're talking a little bit about collecting rejections, one of my favorite rejection stories is in there. From that first story that I finished, I met the editor at my first out of town convention, and I didn't have a lot of convention experience. Like, I think I'd been to a couple of gaming cons. Like, I'd been to Prairie Con out in Brandon a couple of times. I'd been to KeyCon once, but I hadn't been there for the authors. I was there to play D&D.
Amazing.
And I didn't even, like, if I would have known, I was there the year that Roger Zelazny was there.
Oh,
my favorite author. and I had no idea. Like, it wasn't even on my radar to look for authors.
You were too busy calculating Thaco in those days.
Absolutely. I was a Thaco machine.
Yeah. That's hit armor class 0 for those of you who
that weekend I was too busy going insane and dying in Call of Cthulhu, because my group didn't play Call of Cthulhu, so I signed up for every Call of Cthulhu event I could get into. But I was at my first out-of-town convention, which was World Fantasy Con in Calgary, and I met one of the editors from OnSpec magazine, the first place I submitted a story to, because that's what you do if you're Canadian, you submit to OnSpec. And the first words out of my mouth after her short story panel were, "You rejected my story." And I could immediately see her tense up. And I'm like, oh no. But I followed it up with, I really appreciated that you gave me personalized feedback.
Yeah.
And then we started, that was my first short story submission. And then we had like a really nice conversation, and she's like, keep submitting. And because we had that interaction, they weren't the highest paying market, but they were always one of the first places I wanted to send my work, because I had a relationship there.
Some loyalty.
And they ended up being my first short story sale. And then they were my first repeat short story sale, and my first place that I sold 3 stories to. And then it was sort of like, oh my God, like it was sort of like, one time could be a fluke, 2 times could be a coincidence, but it's like I sold 3 stories to the same market. That means something.
Yeah, right. It means something to you.
It means something to me, and and all of those anthologies. Like, now I'm chasing 10 stories with editor Rhonda Parrish, and it's like, I want that.
You're right.
Like, I want that ring. She did an elemental anthology thing, and so it was like stories based around fire, earth, air, and water. And the second she did it, I'm like, I want all of them. I used to play the collectible card game Legend of the Five Rings.
5 Rings, yeah. I used to sell the collectible card game Legend of the Five Rings. You
probably have a lot of my money then. It's a samurai themed, Asian collectible card game in this falling empire, and I loved it.
It's like sword and sorcery with it.
Yeah.
Katana.
And one of the ways you could win that game, which was not a practical way to win, but was through enlightenment, and that was collecting all of the 5 rings: earth, air, fire, water, and void or spirit.
You could win peacefully.
You could win peacefully without attacking anyone.
Yeah.
And it's the second I'm like, and I'd also finished watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I'm like, I want to be the Avatar. I must have all of the elements. And I sold my first story to that anthology series, and I'm like, oh shit, now the pressure's on.
So is short story writing to you like collecting those 5 rings? Is it like a way to stretch yourself and reach out and
Yeah, like there's markets that I want to crack. Like one of the top markets in the field is Clarkesworld, and I want to get in there. I haven't got in there yet, but I do have a card that they hand out at conventions that says "Be nice to this author. He was rejected by Clarkesworld," and I've saved that because it means something. It's like I tried for one of the top markets.
Listen to me, you guys have got to lure him out into the open so we can get a clear shot at him. Over.
No problem there. You want us to wash him up for you too?
I have a spreadsheet organized by, basically by pay rate. And if I think it'll fit, I just go down until it finds a home. Usually, for me, the impetus to write a short story often comes from an anthology open call.
Right.
That makes me want to write the story.
The theme tips you over, and once it's rolling, you decide.
And then I reached a point in my short story writing where I was usually good enough for those anthology open calls that I sold those stories. And so I wasn't trying for a lot of those markets for a long time.
Here's where you find, if you're a fledgling writer and you want to find these, where is there a big two websites?
Submission Grinder, I think, it has.
There was a website for a while. I haven't checked it in at least 9 months, but Coffin Tree Hill used to also aggregate a whole bunch of open call for horror and sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's the same with artists starting out, right? The call for submissions is everything fast, right? If you're looking for an excuse to make stuff.
And the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America typically has these are our pro-paying markets, what they consider a pro-paying market, which I think now is, remember, it's 7 or 8 cents a word is what they consider a pro rate for fiction to be, which is just sad, but that's another.
But
if you're like, okay, where do I want to start? Yeah. Those are the markets where you want to start. And then that Submissions Grinder, it has paid markets or semi-pro, which is it's paying more than 1 cent a word between that, and up to, 5 or 6 cents a word. And then there's paying markets, which are, maybe it's only paying you $50 for a story, or it's paying you, 1 cent a word, but it's paying you something. And then they have for the love markets. If you're like, I just want this to be somewhere. And
that's what I was going to get to. You leapt to it. I was going to suggest that if you are just want to try, right? There are a lot of markets where you can just submit and you can say, I know I'm not ready for prime time, but I do need some feedback and I do need to try. There are unpaid markets where some of those editors take a lot of time to give substantive feedback because they're literally doing it for the love and not the money.
And honestly, most of the sci-fi editors working are kind of doing it for the love and not the money, because they can't, it's not publishing an online sci-fi fantasy magazine is probably not keeping your lights on. That's right. They are, or if you're a slush reader for them, you're doing it for the love, or you're doing it you're reading the slush, all the submitted stories. You're doing it to it's easy to see why you would reject a story when it's somebody else's.
You know that right now, somebody's that's their future great uncle is retelling a version of Thunder Road to some young person. Right? And I think that is why we're doing it, right? Yeah. It's to give back to the community and to the great mythic adventure that brought us into storytelling in the first place.
Well, and telling a story, figuring it out in your head, that's part of it. Writing a book is part of it. A story is not complete until it has its audience, right? If it's a book, the book isn't complete until it is read. And if I'm telling a story, telling it to you is better than telling it to the mirror, right? Because stories change over time.
Haunted mirror.
And yes,
that if a vampire looks at it, has a reflection.
It's not going to work.
Yeah, do not. I'm not saying Candyman. You can't make me say it.
That's right. Don't say it.
I think it's stories are complete when they're told, when they're shared, and everything I write is in conversation with the books and the stories that I grew out of,
right?
And what shaped me.
So you have a big collection of these short stories, which did shape you, and it's 10-year retrospective collection. It's coming out soon. Yeah. Tell people where they should come to find you, and you should. And I'll make a note here. I know there's a few teachers that listen to this podcast. if you're looking for that book of short stories where you can say definitively, this is where the idea came from, and how do we track that shape, you can see it, it's in the notes, and you can have the author come and speak to your classroom because he's local too. So
when the sky comes looking for you launches October 19th at McNally Robinson Booksellers here in Winnipeg. Right away next week. I'm not sure when it will be with the airing of this, but
get it out fast.
It'll be up the same day. Today. Go there. I'll be there too.
Yeah. Dan will be hosting the event and in conversation with me, which I'm very excited about.
That's why I haven't talked much today because I'm saving all my questions for next week.
That's right. You can find out what I'm up to at chadwickginther.com. I am always on Twitter at Chadwick Ginther. There's a Facebook page as well, but yeah, if you want to interact with me on social media, Twitter is probably where you're going to find me.
Will you be at the Winnipeg Comic Con?
I am not doing the Comic Con this year. It was hard to do event planning far out when I didn't know what my circumstances were going to be,
or what events would be.
And I wasn't even 100% sure when the book was going to launch,
right?
Where it would be in that zone. So
let's imagine that this person who is listening, a dear listener, says, "Oh no, I missed the launch of the book. I gotta track down Chadwick in person. What's the best place to do that? What's the next event that you'll be at?"
This is the only in-person event I'm doing, is the hometown launch. I'm not going on the road for it, but if you reach out to me, like I will personalize anybody's books. But I'll tell you what I thought of them.
Stephen King book, and
I'll sign it for you. I'll tell you what I thought of it. No. McNally is great about getting personalized books and signed books on the shelf, and I'm sure if you reach out to them and they're like, I really want a personalized copy of this book, we can make it happen even if you can't be at the launch. For probably the rest of this year, I'm going to be pretty low key on
working on your next
conventions. I have another collection of short stories that I'm trying to revise and get out in the world. I promised myself I was going to finish drafting a novella by the end of the year, so I want to work on that. And clear the deck with those things, then I'll probably be starting a new book in the new year.
Done. Any whispers? Do you know? Does your muse know what book that will be?
I can't stop looking at the Reuben block on the corner of Osborne and Morley, and I really want to turn it into something.
Just like that old shipwreck. I love how connected to the real world.
I love writing in and about Winnipeg. Like, I'm probably never going to get tired of that. I just love it. There's so much here, but I just love that building, and I want to see it used. And if they're not going to restore it and get people living in it or shopping in it or doing something with it, I guess I have to put some monsters in it.
Well, if you are looking for the mythic to rise right out of the gritty reel, you should definitely check out When the Sky Comes Looking for You by Chadwick Ginther. This has been Super Pulp Science. I am Gregory Kamichuk, encouraging you to join the fight and make comics.